Welcome to The Machine, a computer science education podcast from the South East Technological University. I'm your host, Rob O'Connor. Today on the podcast, we're speaking with Dr. Frank Bosman from Tilberg University in the Netherlands. We're going to talk about video games, but from a different perspective than you might expect. We're not going to get bogged down in game engines or scripting languages or artificial intelligence. Well, maybe there might be a bit about artificial intelligence, actually. Instead, what we're going to talk about is religion in video games. Frank has recently authored a book, Gaming and the Divine, a new systematic theology of video games, and it's published by Routledge Press. Frank was recently in Ireland, in Waterford, delivering a lecture in the college as part of an Erasmus Plus trip. I was supposed to go to that. We were supposed to record a podcast in person, but unfortunately I got COVID and was locked away at home. But a few weeks later, via the wonders of the internet, we actually get to do it. Frank, you're very, very welcome.
Yes, so pleased to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
No problem at all. No problem at all. Right. I'm going to start with a question based on your talk that you had delivered in Waterford, and you've even though I wasn't able to attend, you did very kindly send me a video of it. So thank you very much for that.
Yes, you're welcome.
You open your talk with a Latin phrase that I hadn't heard before. That's I hope I pronounce it correctly. Ludus narratio or narratio.
Yes, you did a wonderful job.
Oh, thank you. Come here, tell me, could you explain what that term is and where it fits in the context of thinking about video games?
Well, if you want to talk about video games, you have to make a definition of video games. So what are video games? And for my research, I have looked into the history of the video game research, and you have in the 90s of the last century, you had the discussion between ludologists and narratologists, and two camps, two groups of people doing games. And there was a discussion what a game was. So the first group said that a video game was primarily, if not exclusively, a game, a ludus. Ludus is the Latin word for game. So that means it's a thing you play with, you interact with. It has rules, it has limitations, it has win conditions, feedback loops, problems to solve, things like that. And then you had the other group, the narratologists, who thought about video games primarily or exclusively as a narratio, as a story that is told by the video game. And that was a discussion in the 90s. It has more or less been erased by now, and people usually think that video games are both a game and a story to be told. And I incorporated those two elements within my definition of video game. So if a video game wants to be a video game, it has to tell a story, how small and insignificant it may be, but it has to tell a story. And you have to interact with it. That is, if you do not do anything, the thing won't do anything too. So a book will just be there, even if it's not read. A film will just play on the screen without someone watching it. But a video game can only do something and function if you give it input.
And later on in the talk, you discuss participation as in it's a participatory exercise.
Yes.
Participation rather than observation. So I think you use the example of if you're watching Bilbo Baggins decide to kill somebody or not kill Gollum.
Yeah.
But regardless as to whether you're reading the book or watching a movie, that decision has been made and it's going to happen. Whereas in a video game, but certainly newer games, the player often has a lot of choices, a lot of branching narratives. And so I think it's important to mention that because the idea of choice will come in a lot to what we discuss later on.
Yes.
So if the audience for this podcast is primarily techies, gamers, people who develop video games, programmers, etc., why should they be concerned, or why should they be interested, or why should they think about religion in video games?
Oh, well, that's a very good question. Thank you so much. I think
I'm not trying to cause an argument either with you.
No, absolutely not. No, I'm a theologian, as you know, a cultural theologian. and a Roman Catholic by birth and practice. So I'm feeling very well accustomed to be in the Isle of Saints and Scholars, as I've been told. Ireland is euphemistically called.
Yes.
No, but I think if you want to understand what is going on in our society, if you want to understand what is happening here and now in Western Europe or North America, then if you want to understand society, if you want to understand what humanity is and what it is here at the beginning of the 21st century, you should at least have some knowledge about the cultural umwelt and about the major religious traditions we have in the world and in Western Europe. So religion and the study of religion is not so much to do mission, or it's not so much to gain souls for Christ or something. It's showing to people that religion is a very important part of the lives of many people around the world in present and in past, and that in our post-Christian, post-secular Western world religion, Christian religion predominantly, is still very, very important as a cultural reservoir of ideas, stories, images, and notions. So understanding what we are here and now, you do need to have some understanding of how religion functions and what the Christian narrative is all about. You don't have to believe in God or something like that. Well, you can, of course, but you don't have to. And but you need to understand the basics of the Christian narrative. Otherwise, you don't understand how our culture functions. The same is, for example, if you live in Asia, you should have some idea what Hinduism and Buddhism are all about. Otherwise, you won't be able to attain and to take part in the cultural discussion in your country. And the same is for Christianity and Judaism in Western culture.
Yeah. I can see where you're coming from with that. That would make a lot of sense. Like whether somebody is agnostic or an atheist or a true believer, everyone should be aware of what, say, the cross symbolizes, because it's just part of the culture. Whether it goes beyond that is really up to somebody's individuality. Yeah, of course. Yes. Okay, so again, when, for example, you cite some examples in your talk about like a player having to go through a cathedral or being baptized at the start of the BioShock Infinite game, but there's whether somebody is religious or not is kind of irrelevant, because you just need to understand the symbolism of the religion, perhaps, and what that might mean in a participatory medium such as a video game.
Yes, that's absolutely true. So in Western Europe, we have been brought up in a Western, well, let's say implicit Christian cultural setting. So when we are confronted with Christian symbolism, and well, if we have had some education and we are confronted with Christian symbolism, we usually will understand what it means, because that's just how we are brought up. That's just a part of our culture. But if we try to understand, we as Western European gamers, if we try to understand Korean or Japanese games, like, for example, now I cannot remember. Near Automata, for example. That's a very good example. Then a lot of things go above our heads, or Shikuro, Shadows Die Twice. You can see that there is religion in the game, but you as a Western gamer, you cannot grasp what is actually happening there, because you have not been brought up culturally in Confucianism or Buddhism or things like that. But usually you will have like an intuition. This has something to do with religion, even though you will not exactly know what it's all about. Yeah.
Okay. So just to put my cards on the table, I am what we call in Ireland a lapsed Catholic. I'm also a lapsed gamer. I used to play a lot. I used to play a lot of video games. I don't get to play too many anymore. That's it. That's not because I don't want to. It's just if I have small children and I don't have time. I don't get to play as many games as I would have liked to.
You can play with your children.
I can play some games with my children, yes, but not a lot of the kind of the deeper games that I might like to play. Play a lot of Nintendo games. They're fabulous with the kids, but the say some of the BioShock Infinite, maybe not so much. If you know what I mean.
No, I think you have to be somewhat older to appreciate that.
Yes. But one of the things you mentioned in your talk that I thought was very, very interesting is that to really understand the full context of maybe the narrative choices that a player might make in a video game is to really kind of be a completionist. It's not just to understand what one branch will lead to you, but maybe another. So this is where people want to maybe 100% the game. You also say you don't necessarily have to find every box because that can often be quite difficult.
Yes.
Or hidden item or Easter egg.
Yes.
But I did think the idea of the branching narratives, and often choices do play into where those narratives go. But it's not just where you go, but it's where you could have gone. That is very interesting, particularly if you do a replay of a game and maybe make different choices.
Yeah, for example, a game that does a marvelous job about this is the Stanley Parable. That's a little game. I think recently the Super Deluxe edition was published on Steam. That's a game about human freedom, or the improbability or even the impossibility of human freedom inside the game and outside the game. But that's a very short game. It has like 20 or more different endings, and the point of that game is that it's a very short game, so you can play multiple walks through in a day, and then you have to find as many endings as possible. And I think if you want to do a video game study, you have to try and find all there is in the video game. But you also have to take into account what is humanly possible. So if you want to do an article on the Assassin's Creed series, that's like 10 installments, and every time you want to have 100% completion, that will take you 100. So it will take you 1,000 hours of video play just for one article. I think we both can agree that is out of proportion. So yes you have to try to do your best and find as many clues as possible, many lore elements as possible, but also keep in mind it has to be balanced for what you want to achieve with it.
Yeah. In your talk, you describe what you call 5 shapes of religion in video games. Now, bear in mind, I do know that this is a lecture that's more than an hour long, so I'm not asking you to summarize it, in 10 minutes. But I am actually. I'm asking, could you try to summarize even at a surface level?
Yes. I will try. Robert. So we have 5 shapes of religion in video games, and they get more complicated each time when you go to the next one. The first is the material shape of religion. That is things that bite you in the nose, like cathedrals, monks chanting Gregorian songs, it's incense, it's holy water, graves, crosses, statue of saints, stained glass windows, things like that. Even if you're not brought up culturally in a Western hemisphere, Western influence, then you will still recognize this as having to do anything with religion. It's just religion as anyone would immediately argue that it is.
Yeah.
Then you have the second form, that is the referential shape of religion in video games. That is when a video game makes a reference to outside the game existing religious tradition. So, for example, in Assassin's Creed Origins, you have you can make a trip through the Egyptian desert 2,000 years ago. You can make a trip to the Egyptian desert. It's very hot, and then you get a epiphany, and in the epiphany, you can see a fish flapping in the dust of the desert, and then you see a burning bush, and when you approach it, you will see that the branches are not touched by the fire, and that is, of course, a reference to the story in Exodus, the second book of the Old Testament, in which Moses meets God, the God of Israel, at the burning bush. And then you really have to know that it is a reference. If you don't know the story of Exodus, you will not see the reference. So it takes more effort for the gamer to see this form of religion. Then you have the third one, that's the referential shape of religion in video games. That is when the video game tackles existential notions which are traditionally associated with religion. So video games that make you as a gamer contemplate things like life and death, friendship, forgiveness, atonement, wrath, lust, all the things that makes our human life so interesting. And a lot of video games are struggling with these kind of existential psychological notions. For example, Bioshock or Bioshock Infinite, you already mentioned. Then you have the fourth shape of religion in video game, that is the ritual shape, in which the game urges you or even forces you as a player to take part in what is traditionally considered a religious ceremony or ritual. So, for example, in Bioshock Infinite, you already said it, the beginning of the game, you have to pass a giant baptismal font, and there's a preacher standing in the water. You want to go to the city after beyond the baptismal font, and then the preacher said you can only pass if you allow yourself to be baptized. And then the game forces you as a player to accept a baptism, and not all players are equally comfortable by that, because there's a famous story that the video gamer protested against it because he was already baptized, he claimed, and he got his refund by Valve.
There's a lot to be. I'm sure there's other issues at play there, but I thought that was a very interesting one.
If you want to discuss it, we can do that, of course. But it's a very interesting theme.
Yeah. Well, no, we carry on because there's a lot. Because I think if we could get bogged down in one story and miss the larger whole, because I think you could do a Google search about this guy who had an issue with that, and you can draw your own conclusions. So we've had material, referential, reflexive, and ritual. Yeah. And the fifth one.
Yeah, fifth is the meta shape. And that's the most difficult one, but also the point I wanted to make in the Gaming and the Divine, the book you were so kindly to mention, is that in some instances the act of playing a game itself could be considered as a religious deed in itself. So then the actual playing of the video game becomes a religious act in itself. And I always have two examples. First is A Child of Light, made by Ubisoft, and the other one is Metro series. It was inspired by a Russian author, but was developed by an Ukrainian game developer, and I always feel a bit sad when I tell this detail to my audience. In a better world, we could have cooperated between a Russian author and a Ukrainian studio, of course, but that was once upon a time. And in the second installment, it was called Metro Last Light. Yes. Then you have to choose if you want to save your worst enemy or not. And whatever you save him or not, above the cupboard he is sitting against, you find an icon of Jesus Christ, the standard arche icon of the Russian or the Eastern Orthodox theological tradition. So, and we can go in detail in that case, but just broadly speaking, if you choose to save your worst enemy while the Christ icon is looking down upon you, I would like to argue that then the act of playing itself becomes religious in nature.
So, well, let's explore that one, because it ties an awful lot of I suppose the thrust of your argument together. So, no, I have not played any of the Metro games. I have them on the list, an ever-growing list of games that I should play. But because I've heard they're very excellent.
Good,
yeah,
they're very good.
And there's a Redux version as well, I think.
Yes, for the first one.
Yeah. So this idea, this character at the end, so your enemy, and he has no gas mask, and you can fix his mask or not fix his mask. But you make an interesting point that there's an act of you're being watched.
Yes.
And that is actually central to this Eastern Orthodox church, that you're being watched.
Yes. And that sounds spooky. Yeah? So if someone says to you, you are being watched, then you have to look over your shoulder, and then you see men in black suits with earpieces in, with a newspaper in front of them with two eyes cut out of it, so they can watch you from the bushes and watch every movement of you. But in this case, it's like more a theological or more a religious thing. In Orthodox theology, the icon, we do not so much look to the icon. Of course, we do look to the icon, but the icon is also looking back to us. So if you know what an icon is, you know that it is always staring you in the face, like Mona Lisa. It doesn't matter where you stand in relation to the icon in the room. It always looks directly into your eyes. So in this case, the icon always knows, so to say, that someone is watching to it. So you as a watcher, you as someone who watches the icon, you are part of the communication of that icon because it looks at you. There has to be someone to look to, and you look back. So in Orthodox theology, it's like a going back and forth between the icon and the one looking to the icon. So the icon hanging above the cupboard where Pavel, your worst enemy, is lying against, and you just have made a choice to save him or to let him die. And then the icon will look upon you either favorably, if you saved your worst enemy, the icon will say, "Well, my son, you have done well, you have done as I have taught you to forgive your worst enemy." Or if you have chosen to let Pavel die, the icon will look upon you, disgruntlingly and, suggesting something. Well, that was not what I have told you to do. So the icon is actually there to make the point that is already there, that you as a player are some kind of a theophanic or theophoric figure within that game. But you have a trailer. You have the Genesis trailer of Metro Last Light, and in the Genesis trailer, it is claimed that there is no God. And why is there no God? If there had been a God, God would have prevented the nuclear war that destroyed almost everything and everyone on the planet Earth. So that's like the theodicy problem. If you believe in an all-powerful and loving God, how can there be so much evil and suffering? That's the theodicy theme. So the trailer tells the player there is no God. This is such a horrible world. God cannot exist in this world. And then in the Mother of God Cathedral, in the game, you see Pavel against the cupboard. You can save him or let him die. And then you have the icon looking upon you and either applauding you or criticizing you. And then the message of the game cannot be otherwise, I think, interpreted as that it tries to tell you, well, if there is a God within this horrible post-apocalyptic world, then it has to be found in the player, because the player is the one able to forgive instead of taking revenge. So the only place where God can be found in that explicit atheist world is in the actions of the player. And that's what constitutes the fifth form of religion in video games.
And you also make the argument that these are not mutually exclusive. A game can have material aspects as well as meta aspects, as well as it can have any one or all or however many of those five, depending on the game.
And depending on the game, usually you have more than one form at once. But it's a mixture. So for example, in BioShock Infinite, you have material religion because you're walking in a church, you see candles burning, you have devotees praying, you hear a Christian song playing over the speakers. So you have material religion. It's also referential religion because the religion in BioShock Infinite is like a hyperbolic version of American evangelism. That is referential. It's reflexive in the sense that it makes the player wonder what forgiveness and responsibility means, and are there certain types of sins that cannot be atoned for? That's the reflexive shape of religion. It has, of course, the ritual shape because you have to agree to let yourself be baptized or not. And maybe, but I have not thought about it, yet maybe also the fifth shape of religion also take place in Bioshock Infinite. Yes, if there would have been a choice I'm not going to spoil it for you, but if there had been a choice at the end, yes, maybe. But there is no choice at the end of Bioshock Infinite. So I would argue only the first four.
As you describe those 5 shapes of religion, I wonder if those 5 shapes could also be applied to other moral or ethical pieces that might be put into a video game, or spiritual pieces that might be put into a video game that maybe don't necessarily represent a religion. And I'll give you an example of maybe what I'm thinking of. Now, again, bear in mind, I'm quite out of date with a lot of video games, so I'll have to kind of go back into the vault for a bit. But I remember the game. So it's a Star Wars game, Knights of the Old Republic. I don't know if you've ever played this game. Have you?
Played it. Yeah, played
it.
So
you kind of make light or dark choices, right? Yeah. It's based around Jedi and all that, which is not a religion. Although some people do have it as an official religion.
Yes, they have.
And I know it's a collection of a whole variety of different beliefs, kind of thrown into a blender with some industrial light and magic. But you the choices that the character makes and the moral choices to kill kill people, to help somebody or not help somebody, does impact the game as it branches along its quite long narrative. But I wouldn't call it religious, but I would say that there's a morality at play in Knights of the Old Republic and also in the second game, which is maybe a little bit more interesting as well.
Yeah. Well, it all depends on your definition. So here we go, trying to make a definition of religion and things like that. So maybe I will not dare to go into that field of make a definition of what religion is.
Yes,
but let's make it more easy. I think video games, just like other examples of popular culture, can be analyzed from many different points of view. You can make a philosophical analysis, you can make a moral analysis, or an ethical analysis, you can make a theological analysis. And indeed, there are a number of games that explicitly try to incorporate ethical gameplay into their own games. For example, the Mass Effect series, or the Fallout series, or Bioshock 1, for that matter, but also the Star Wars games you just mentioned. They try to incorporate a morality system, and if a morality system is incorporated well into a game, it does not always do, but it should encourage the player to prioritize narratological, ethical gameplay above ludo-strategical gameplay. So usually you try to optimize your ludological behavior. You have to find the quickest, the best way through the maze, the optimal way to defeat an enemy, the optimal way to grind for a certain item. That is all ludo-strategical behavior. You just have to be as good as you can become in that specific game. But morality systems try to appeal to a different kind of playing video game. That is the narratological, ethical kind of gameplay, that you don't try to make the game the best for you, work the best for you, but you have to make a moral decision. What is good and what is wrong? And what does it mean for me as a player, or for my avatar in the game? How do I know if a choice is good or bad? What are the consequences on the short term and or the long term of the choices I am making here and now? And Life is Strange is a game that's working with that kind of difference between short term and long term consequences. So then you do not try to optimize the gameplay. You try really hard to think, what is good? What's the good option here, or the evil one if you try to play as an evil character? But usually people try to play as the good one. What is the good option here? What's the moral justifiable option here?
Right. I know I'm asking you this. I'm being devil's advocate here, right?
Yes.
Is the insertion of this religious aspect or moralistic aspect to video games a way to add depth to running around shooting people or
Yes.
whatever else somebody else is doing?
Yes. Yes. Well. You now have found what is called the ludonarrative dissonance. So usually you have a resonance, a ludonarrative resonance. That means that what the game actually asks you to do, shooting people, and the story that it tries to tell you, you are a big soldier who has to defend your home country from Nazis. And you have a resonance, what you have to do in the game and what the story of the game tells you are in sync. But when you have other games, for example, the Metro games, where you have to forgive your worst enemy because then you are the god in the atheist game world, that is what the narratio conveys to you. But before that and after that, you have to just to kill endless amounts of adversaries. So then you have a ludo-narrative dissonance where the playing of the game and the storytelling of the game are not in sync with one another. And there are a lot of games who are suffering from that specific kind of dissonance. And there are games who actually try to problematize that. So you have Spec Up the Lines, which is a Middle East war simulator. Spec Up the Lines by I thought it was made by a German developer. And that game first encourages you to kill as many people as you can. And then it forces you to think about what you have done. So that's one of the games which actually first tries to build up that dissonance and then actually addresses that dissonance. But that's only a very small minority of video games who are smart enough to pull this off.
What element does technology play in this? I know we're talking about video games, so it's inherently technological in nature. But what element do the advances of technology play in this ludus narratio construct? And I'll tell you the reason why I'm asking you this is this type of deeper, more moralistic, philosophical game, religious game, is really only something that I have seen in the last number of years as games have become, I don't want to say more realistic because it doesn't always have to be, photorealistic. But games are able to be bigger, have more complex systems built into them, like morality systems in the case of Knights of the Old Republic, as opposed to games from the 80s and 90s that were much simpler in terms of their playability. And I'll give you an example. So, no, this is coming off the top of my head, so I might be wrong about this. I don't think I am, though. I remember the very first Prince of Persia game from probably the early 90s.
Yeah,
I'd say
from
it was.
Broederbond.
Yeah. But do you remember, nowadays it looks very primitive. Back then
I know
it was...
the first one. I tried to beat it in vain.
Yeah, but right, so there's an interesting, so you like the game is a platformer, you're kind of running, jumping, you have sword fights with people, blah, blah, blah. But at the very end, you're fighting yourself, or you're fighting a mirror version of yourself.
Yeah, like Link to the Past, yeah.
Yeah, and then you try to, you keep fighting, you can't win. Or no matter what you do, the other guy always gets, or the mirror version of you always gets the best of you. But if I remember correctly, the only way you can win is to put away your sword.
Yeah, that's true.
But it looks a bit naff. It looks a bit crap now compared to what you might be able to do with that kind of moral choice in 2022 compared to what it was like in 1992 or whenever that game came out. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, they did something familiar with the Prince of Persia 2018 version. It was like a standalone. It came after the Scent of Times, Scent of Times trilogy, but before the Assassin's Creed series, which was actually intended to be like a new Prince of Persia series, but it developed into another direction. And then if you fall from a platform or from a cliff, then your companion, she's called Elika, will magically save you. And then at one time your companion is abducted by I thought by a sorceress, I thought. And then you have to identify her. You have to identify her in order to rescue your companion, Elika. And the only way to identify her correctly is by jumping off a cliff. Because when you jump off a cliff, then she will magically save you. So that's like a bit. So you have to surrender yourself, more or less. And if you surrender yourself, then you will be paid off. And I think that your example of fighting yourself and having to put your sword away in order to win was actually, for the time, a very, very intelligent and very brilliant concept. You can also, I think it was very good thought of. So in the early days of gaming, like the the Nintendo Entertainment System, 8-bit entertainment systems, you had not a lot of room for story. It was Ludus 99%, and then you had a story, but the story was usually told in like a couple of words or lines at the beginning or the end of the game. It was crappy most of the times.
I know, so, save the princess.
Yes,
or
whatever.
Defeat the monster. There's yeah.
So you had hardly no narration at all. But since the advance of technology from the 90s onwards, you had more and more room for elaborate forms of storytelling, including morality system, feedback mechanisms, things like that. And I think games benefited both ludologically and narratologically from the technological advancements, but especially the narratio part did develop itself very well.
Yeah. It's an interesting area. It's a fascinating kind of way just to kind of think about games. And since watching your talk, I know I haven't been playing any games since, but I'm kind of wondering the next time I approach a video game, which may be tonight or maybe in 2 weeks, I might pay a bit more attention to some of the stuff that's presented on the screen or some of the sounds that I might hear that might have perhaps a deeper meaning. Why? I want to go back to the question I asked you at the start. Why should game developers be concerned with the theology or the spirituality or the philosophy or the religious aspects of a game?
Well, I think first and foremost, game developers should do what they do best, develop games.
Okay.
So if you try to make, let's for example say Christian games or Bible games, then you get very crappy games like the Wisdom Tree library from the 8-bit era or the Adam's Venture series. They're for Vertigo games. They're very, very bad games. So I would encourage developers to do what they do best, develop games. And if they try to make interesting, engaging game narratives, then there has to be religion, ethics, and philosophy will be there in it without even having tried to incorporate it. So if you want to tell a good story, every good story has ethics, philosophy, bit of religion, bit of everything. So a good story out and in of itself will provide a interesting narrative to which you can go and which you can analyze from a theological and a philosophical and an ethical point of view. To just make good games, and we theologians, we will do the rest.
Brilliant. I think that's a wonderful way to close it out on, and to maybe think. I like, if I've taken anything away from your talk, and I want to read your book now as well, is it's just making me think about these pixels on a screen in a slightly different fashion than maybe I have in the past.
Wonderful, Robert. Wonderful.
And I suppose that's perhaps a win, hopefully. And maybe
definitely.
Yeah, and maybe some of the people who are listening, some of the developers who maybe are just concerned about shooty, clicky, or whatever it is, maybe
I'm for hire.
Yeah. But, well, I'll be honest with you, Frank. Like, so the games that have stuck with me the longest, like for just even thinking about, like, I can't believe I'm thinking about Prince of Persia, a game I have not played in 30 years, but just that choice at the end has come back to me because it wasn't just, you know, killing somebody, you know, that's slightly more difficult than it was previously. Or I think about Knights of the Old Republic. It's a game that I still think about today. I played it through twice. It's one of the few games I've played through, modern games I've played through twice. I played initially as good, and then I tried to play as evil, and I found myself branching back into the good because I didn't like what I was doing. Or Mass Effect, actually, because I like those type of games, or I don't get to play them anymore.
Mass Effect's really good. We now have the anniversary edition.
Yeah.
With the improved graphics and the possibility to migrate your profile from game to game.
Yes, I've heard about that. I'd nearly go back and play that because I have an Xbox.
It's on my list.
Is it? Okay.
I want to replay it again. I think it's one of the best video game series ever made.
Okay, so right. So you're saying Mass Effect. What other games would you recommend that people check out? You know, that have this religious depth to them.
I would say Child of Light by Ubisoft.
Mm-hmm.
Mass Effect, especially Mass Effect 2, which is the best one of the three. Bioshock Infinite, Metro series, Limbo, Stanley Parable, Inside.
Okay.
That are the games to play.
That's a fabulous list.
Thank you.
There you go. That's a fabulous list. I haven't played a lot of them. So I'm going to put Limbo has been on my list for quite some time. I hear it's excellent.
Very good.
Yeah,
it's very good.
Excellent. Right. Okay. Well, if somebody wants to find out more about you, you're on Twitter at Frank G. Bosman.
Yes.
You also have a WordPress blog, frankgbosman.wordpress.com.
Yeah,
I see a lot of it.
It's all in Dutch, but you can send me an English mail, so no problem.
But I see you have a link to some videos up there, and the videos are in English, and they're also captioned as well. So if anyone wants to follow along with those, you can follow this podcast at Machine Podcast if you're a Machine_podcast on Twitter if you're into that kind of stuff. And Frank's book Gaming and the Divine: A New Systematic Theology of Video Games is out now. It's published by Routledge Press, and if you just Google it, you will find it. Frank, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Thank you for having me, Robert.
It's genuinely been an eye-opening experience, and it will make me change the way I approach video games next time I get to play them. Although, I'll be honest with you, I do still like the kind of run around shooting people, killing things, and winning World War II single-handedly.
There should always be room for running around and shooting people games. Always.
Brilliant. Frank, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.